I don't typically like to put this at the very beginning of a video, but in this case, it's necessary. I'll be showing footage from my entire playthrough of Sekiro. If you care about avoiding spoilers, thanks for watching and keep gaming, gamers, but you should probably get out now. Anyway. This is perhaps the voice line I heard the most during my first playthrough of Sekiro. Back then, I thought it was the game taunting the player. It plays every time you die to the final boss, which, considering the difficulty of this game, will probably be many, many times. It just felt like the developers poking fun at me. I wasn't confident enough, fast enough, or prepared enough. So I lost. And yeah, I still think I was right. The existence of lost dialogue at all feels like an attempt to provoke the player into trying one more time. But what I didn't realize at the time was just how much this statement perfectly reflects the entire gameplay of Sekiro. I went into my second playthrough with a clear question. What makes this game special? Sekiro is one of my absolute favorite games. It's in the top 10 at least. But before my second and most recent playthrough, I really couldn't tell you why. Sure, I could have told you some of the things I liked about it. Its demanding combat, its brutal yet well-balanced difficulty, the fact that you're a fucking ninja, etc. But I couldn't articulate why I liked Sekiro so much more than the games that did similar things. I mean, it's by the same developers as the Dark Souls series. How could Sekiro stand up to those absolute juggernauts? What is so special about this game? Well, after playing through it a second time, I was finally able to piece together my answer. If I had to describe it in the simplest terms, I'd say this. Sekiro's gameplay has an incredibly satisfying journey to mastery. So, do me a favor, watch this clip real quick. Thanks, I just thought that gameplay was super clean, but it also demonstrates the pace of Sekiro's combat. It's fast, it's active, you're almost never on the defensive, and unless you need a moment to heal, the most powerful position to be in is right in the enemy's face. A lot of challenging combat systems tend to be defensive. You're typically dodging an enemy's attacks and waiting for an opening to strike. And that's alright, this combat style is still pretty fun, but there's something magical about being able to create your own openings. Think about it. What's the coolest move in most melee combat systems? The parry. Being able to turn an enemy's attack into your own opportunity is a great way to give the player agency, even when they should be in a disadvantageous position, and it's the core of Sekiro's swordplay. You're pretty fast, and you could theoretically jump and dodge your way through the game, but the deflection and posture systems discourage that kind of defensive play. For those who don't know, there are two ways to defeat an enemy in Sekiro. You can drain their health bar, or you can break their posture. Draining their health is pretty self-explanatory. You just hit them enough times that the red bar drops to 0. Posture, on the other hand, is a bit more interesting. You can damage an enemy's posture by either attacking or deflecting their attacks. If you manage to break their posture, you can cut off an entire health bar, regardless of how many times you actually landed hits. But on top of this, enemies regain their posture over time when you're not actively engaging them. So you can still play defensively and whittle down their health over time, but if you want to end the fight as efficiently as possible, you're going to have to play more aggressively. As long as you know how to deflect, it's typically safer in the long run to stay close to the enemy. And while the posture system is definitely the most effective design decision at encouraging aggression, it's far from the only one. Sekiro's combat went all in on letting the player just never take their foot off the gas. For example, take this issue. How do you keep the player from retreating and playing defensively when their health is low? The answer is simple. Make the enemy a health pack. TF2's kunai, Doom's glory kills, that one mechanic in Blood... I don't have a PlayStation. All of these keep the player in the fight even when they have low health, because it's the most efficient way to heal. As long as you have enough skill to not just die before you get that health drop, you're far more sustainable staying in the action than if you had fallen back to regroup. And Sekiro's Breath of Life skills fall into the same category. They reward you with a significant amount of health for a successful death blow. While these skills are technically optional, I consider them downright mandatory. They, as well as the more forgiving enemy AI, make the player better equipped for group fights than in any other From Software game. If this was Dark Souls and I saw this, I'd just turn right around and leave, because I'd almost certainly get overwhelmed and stun-locked and instantly killed. But in Sekiro, sure, I can take on like 20 monkeys, it's just like real life. As long as you're bold and aggressive and consistently getting death blows, then you can walk out of a group fight without needing to heal, sometimes even healthier than when you started. While there are a bunch of other examples I could go into on this topic, I think you get the point by now. Sekiro does all it can to encourage staying in the action. The only part of its gameplay that doesn't complement this playstyle is the stealth system, which is honestly kind of overpowered. You can kill all regular enemies in a single backstab, and it can pull off an entire mini-boss health bar. And if you fail, oh well, you can just use the ancient shinobi technique of running away and hiding until everybody forgets about you. This system really isn't my favorite, but luckily it's never mandatory, and its overpowered nature is often offset by the fact that it takes much longer to pull off than just running in sword swinging. And beyond that, it's a complete non-issue in all real boss fights. We don't talk about the monkeys. Which is great, because those are when the combat is most important anyway. But, alright, all I've really done so far is establish that the gameplay incentivizes hitting a bunch of buttons, and that's not necessarily compelling combat. But there is a factor that elevates Sekiro's gameplay above being just a mashy mess. And to find it, we should look back at my last video. No, one more. Yeah, that's right, this video was actually Sekiro depth through difficulty the entire time. As I brought up in the intro, this game is a little bit hard, and more specifically, it can be quite precise. So, what's the main difference between the combat in Sekiro and, say, a 3D Zelda game, another very aggressive combat system? Well, in Zelda, you just kind of mash the attack button, but if you do that in Sekiro, you get absolutely destroyed. Sekiro's combat is basically a rhythm game. Ideally, you'll be blocking the enemy's attacks in time and using your own to fill in any gaps. But this is a bit of an issue when you realize that enemy attacks can be pretty darn fast. And beyond that, many enemies are quite oppressive, you're barely given a chance to breathe. So by the time you've composed yourself and thought, by golly, I think I should dodge this upcoming attack, you're already dead. Your fingers almost have to be moving faster than your mind. In other words, Sekiro forces you to get in the zone. The zone is an almost mythic concept in video games. It's where every player wants to be. It's something everybody understands for themselves, but it's not very clearly defined. If I had to take a stab at it, I'd just define it as full immersion, the point where you're completely focused on the game, to the point that, in your mind, you're not pushing buttons on a controller anymore, you're just controlling the character directly. Sekiro basically forces you into the zone if you want to win. You need to be focusing hard to keep up with some of these telegraphs, and beyond that, it is such a massive emphasis on mechanical skill that you can afford to essentially clear your mind and act purely on instinct. But you can only do that once you've put in the practice and died over and over again, slowly learning a little bit with each death. With that experience, you gradually get better with just letting your hands take over, until eventually you've mastered it, and you can finally emerge victorious. So, let's revisit that question I had in the intro. What makes Sekiro special? Well, put simply, it makes mastery fun. Its combat isn't just action-packed, immersive, and satisfying. It constantly pushes you to improve, all while never losing its fun factor. The process of going from a bumbling moron who looks like he's never held a sword in his life to a complete master of the weapon is something I don't find in games very often. Few others forced me to ingrain their gameplay as deep into my muscle memory as Sekiro, and I love it for that. It's no wonder this game lets you refight bosses whenever you want. It knew you'd want to go back to experience some of the best sword fights in gaming all over again. One of my favorite details in the game is the way Sekiro draws his sword in the first major fight versus the final one. At the beginning of the game, he has to fumble around a bit to find the handle. At the end, his hand goes right to it. It's not hard to see the experience of a first-time player mirrored here. At the beginning of the game, you have to make up your strategy as you go along. At the end, it's instinctual. At the beginning, you struggle to learn the new control scheme. At the end, it's like the controller isn't even there. At the beginning, there's uncertainty in your actions. At the end, there's no hesitation. Thanks for watching, and keep gaming, gamers.